We are ready to get started with the last part of the program, and we deliberately tried to set it up in a way where I know it's Friday afternoon, and I think this this next panel should be one of the most lively and entertaining of all of our panels. It's a slightly different perspective of some large landowners or people who are engaged with large landowners in different kinds of ways. And so I am personally really looking forward to this discussion. Our moderator, Tracy Stone Manning, Executive Director of the Clark Fork Coalition. We have Rock Ringling of the Montana Land Alliance, Mike Story of the Story Ranch Cattle Company, and Russ Turner of Turner Enterprises. So I'm very pleased to welcome you on stage.
That's Russ Miller, Turner Enterprises. Sometimes I wish I would guess.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We've been in this room with no windows all afternoon. We had a big lunch. I need everybody to sort of push in the mental clutch because we are about to shift gears and talk about not development of large parcels, but the inherent challenges and opportunities that being a large landowner gives us. I'm the moderator. My name is Tracy Stone Manning. I'm with the Clark Fork Coalition here in Missoula. And mostly my goal is to herd these guys, ask some questions, and then we're going to open it up to you to ask questions as well. And because it's 4 on a Friday afternoon and we're all tired, I want one of them to jump up and down on the couch like on Oprah and like scream at some point, so be watching. I am going to start with Mike on the end and let each of these guys introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about why they're here.
Hi, I'm Mike Story. I was lucky enough to be born and raised on a family ranch, Paradise Valley. My great-great-grandfather was one of the first people to bring cattle to Montana. When he started on the ranch, it was open range, way before the homesteaders, way before development, things like that. He had cattle from Virginia City all the way to Billings, Montana. Through the family, we've kind of lost land and gained land, and homesteaders bought out, and we've been lucky enough, my grandfather, my father, myself, and my siblings, to put together an 11,000 acre ranch in the 1970s, of which we've been trying to keep on a cattle basis. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme that we thought, so we've all been doing other things. I put together elk hunting outfitting business that keeps the ranch going along with the cattle, but our main concern and our family is trying to bring this thing down another generation. Every generation it's getting harder and harder, but we're trying not to develop it all. Thank you.
My name is Russ Miller, General Manager of Turner Enterprises. I think the reason Jonathan may have invited me to sit on this panel is because of a conservation easement that we placed on the Flying V Ranch. We acquired it in 1989. I use the collective we when it's to my advantage with Mr. Turner. We acquired it in 1989, placed a conservation easement on it, The Flying D is 113,000 acres, approximately 175 square miles, right on the flanks of a very rapidly expanding Bozeman Valley. On the Flying D Ranch, as on all of our ranches, we have a mission statement and consider ourselves to be mission-driven in what we do. That mission statement is to manage our lands in an economically sustainable and ecologically sensitive manner while promoting the conservation of native species. And the Flying D, kind of like Mike's ranch, does depend on diverse streams of income. One is more traditional agriculture, grazing, although with a non-traditional animal. Unlike though what the stock grower said to me once, geez, you're raising those exotic bison on the Flying D Ranch. I said, wait a minute. I think the bison are native and Angus and Hereford are exotic. No offense. We have a traditional grazing operation on the ranch. We also do some selective logging for disease infestation purposes to reduce disease infestation. And we have a commercial hunting operation on the ranch, capitalizing on the wildlife resource that we support. And lastly, we have minimal farming on the ranch, production of some hay along the river bottoms.
Good afternoon, I'm Rock Wingling. I'm the Managing Director of the Montana Land Alliance. We're a statewide open space and agricultural land trust based in Helena. We have an office in Billings, we also have an office in Big Fork. To kind of put it in perspective about the Montana Land Alliance, 13% of all the land that's held in private land conservation in the United States, the Montana Land Alliance holds. We've been very successful in private land conservation, and we continue to be. I give a little background about myself. My family ranches between Miles City and Ekalaka. Like Mike, I was lucky enough to be born into an agricultural operation, very traditional kind of an ag operation. We're a cow-calf yearling operation. Also, the family's also in the order buying business in western North and South Dakota and eastern Montana. So I grew up in a very isolated, very remote part of Montana. We're 65 miles east of Miles City and 35 miles west of Ekalaka. Like I like to say, it's both isolated and remote. And then I was lucky enough, two things happened. I have an 87-year-old father who's running my cows for me, thanks to estate planning. And also lucked out and went to work for the Land Alliance, which has become somewhat of a vocation. Working with private landowners all across the state of Montana. I'd like to begin this little discussion because everybody seems like you're kind of asleep. I came across 8 years ago, there was a gathering in Great Falls, Montana. Basically it was a gathering and it was titled the Booster and Development Club of Great Falls. And they invited people from Bozeman, Missoula, Great Falls, Livingston, to come to Great Falls, and as their keynote speaker, they invited Charlie Russell to come and speak. And I'd like to share this quote with you just to kind of say how far we've come in some ways, and maybe in some perspectives how far we've not come. In my view, a booster and a developer is someone who killed off the game, starved the Indians, and plowed the grass under. And I wish none of you sons of bitches were here at all. And I guess that kind of, so I represent kind of maybe the, and work with private landowners that maybe we're the antithesis of development. I'm in the development business, but I'm in the development of open space business. It's been interesting to kind of listen to all this that's happened today. We'd like to sit back and hear some questions.
So these men have some things in common, not the least of which is they either get to live on or often visit and be a part of some of the most spectacular land in the country. And they also all can lean over and pick at what you guys and I would call grass and say, oh, this is blue bunch or this is fescue, and tell you why it's good for whatever it is they're raising, whether it be inadvertently deer and elk or bison or cattle. So I think that we've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to try and focus it in two different ways. As large landowners or people who work with large landowners, they've got pressures coming in a couple different avenues. And mind you, we were talking about this earlier, we don't want anybody to think that large landowners are whining because, as aforementioned, they get to live in the most beautiful place on the planet. But they have cultural things coming down to bear on them, and they also have real ecological responsibilities coming to bear on them as well, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Those cultural benefits that they provide are in some ways very tangible. We get to look and say, God, we love that open space. And we get to say, boy, we're really glad that elk herd is growing. And sometimes they're also intangible in the way of, boy, that big landowner makes a great neighbor. When I need help, I know I can call him even if it's 2 in the morning. And with a shifting demographic and with part-time residents, those kinds of things are changing. So Mike, if you could talk a little bit about how your family has watched those changes and what some of perhaps the benefits are, what some of the negatives are.
Yeah, I used to tell my hunters, I'd take up on the ranch and come down the roads. They'd look out across the valley and they say, wow, it's desolate out there. And I look down there and I see a city, I see something growing, I see a lot of subdivisions coming out. And I think about when I was a kid, I used to be able to name every yard light I could see out there and what ranch it was. I'm looking now, we're one of 3 ranches that are still in the valley that aren't being developed. The hardships are the development areas on our side. 8 miles of borderline with a church called Church Universal and Triumphant, a paramilitary group for a while that thought the world was coming to an end. And they weren't too friendly. Now I'm kind of looking at it like Montana had a law. You fence cattle out and you fence sheep in. When you get neighbors of subdivisions, they don't care about the fences. They don't like your cattle on them, but if the fence doesn't look good, they'll tear it down, they'll move it, they'll make them whatever they want to do. It's hard watching these developments move in alongside of you. So that's been one of our bigger problems.
Russ, what's your experience when Turner Enterprises picked up the ranch, the Flying D in 1989? There was a bunch of bad press. There was a bunch of local pushback. Have you gotten past that? And if so, how?
I might not be the most objective. I would say I think we have. We used a maxim when we bought the ranch that is probably a little bit shop-worn, but it seemed to resonate with the press, and that is that tight fences make good neighbors. So one of the first things we did was to make certain that we respected the fact that we're a ranch inside a ranching community. We have ranchers as neighbors, and we couldn't come in and be cavalier about our responsibilities as members of that community. When Ted was posed the question, so how are you going to keep all those bison in? He said, well, we'll fence them, and we'll control them. And he said, if we don't, and they maraud down the main street of Bozeman, I'll cover them on CNN. So I'm a winner both ways. It goes beyond fences, though. And this is something that is a common thread amongst all of our properties, and that is that we have to respect the local community and the culture of that community, and we have to make a tangible demonstration of that respect. One of the most simplistic ways is to deal locally. I had questions when we first bought the Flying D. Are you still going to use the local vet? Are you still going to use the local Chevy dealership? Are you still going to use the local grocery stores? And I said, of course we are. I mean, we got to be contributing members of this community. One thing that maybe goes a little bit beyond that, and I heard some discussion this morning from one of the presenters about, well, perhaps it was Ted Gilbert. He talked about support for the hospital in Ennis, I believe, and someone else maybe talked about fire hall. As a result of difficulty sometimes in finding employees for ranches to move to more remote locations, and I do not call the Flying D a remote location, what we encountered was a reluctance of people to move to remote locations because of inadequate schools for the kids and inadequate support for the children. That, as one of the most recent presenters said, children are really the lifeblood of a community. And what we developed, because we determined that in a lot of our surrounding communities of our ranches, there is very little support in a dwindling population for youth activities. So we developed something called the Turner Community Youth Development Initiative. And we identified the local trade areas around all of our ranches in the West. And so it would be towns as small as Lima and Harrison and Townsend to Helena to Dillon to Bozeman to Belgrade to Gallatin Gateway. And every year we made available to youth-driven organizations in those communities that had to be staffed by the youth of the community grants to do projects that they considered important to their local youth community. And since 1998, which was the inception of the program in Montana, we've distributed somewhere around $1.8 million through that program. And in the 7 states in the West where we have ranches, it totals somewhere around $4 million.
Has it worked? Do people think better of you?
Well, I think they do. The neighbors that at the outset were worried about a rich landowner moving in and perhaps being insular and isolated from the community, or not being able to control his chosen form of livestock on the ranch. When interviewed several years later, I know that one of the ranchers said to a reporter, you know, I was worried that Turner's bison were going to be out on me. But what I've discovered is that my cattle have actually been on Turner more than his bison have been out on me. And while I'm real anxious for him to get his bison off of me, he's been pretty patient in me getting my cattle off of him. As far as whether it works in the community, in Bozeman, I think we're a little bit blessed in that we, to a large degree, are considered like preaching to the choir, because there's a fairly strong quote-unquote environmental element in Bozeman, with whom what we do on the Flying D resonates, with whom a conservation easement resonates, with whom support for various endangered species programs resonate.
Oh my God, I'm part of a quote-unquote environmental community. Rob, can you talk to us a little bit about some of your, I guess I call them clients, people who fly in, fall in love with Montana, buy a ranch. How do you prepare them for what it means to be a good neighbor? How do you do that? How do you get them prepared for the idea of things like access?
Over the years, over the last, I guess over the last 20 years, as we've watched people come in, and I have 2 very distinct clientele. I have a clientele that's basically the indigenous ranch clientele of Montana, and then also our other clientele is the 1%, if you will, the kind of the top end of America that come out here to buy ranches. And when somebody comes out and they've had an apartment in Fifth Avenue in New York, not to pick on New York, or pick on Fifth Avenue, but that was your sense of ownership or private ownership, was living in an apartment house and with a doorman, and you get around, and all of a sudden you come out and you buy, a 5,000 acre, 1,000 acres, or 20,000 acre ranch in Montana. There, all of a sudden, you you have a whole different sense of what does it mean to own landscape. And so we've instituted basically a program where people that come in, if we match them with properties or work with a lot of brokers that are in this room that we've worked with, we sit down and basically have a class called Ranch Owner 101. And simple things like, if you're standing in the middle of your ranch and you're looking at your fence, which half of it is yours to fix? What about, a lot of controversial thing, you bought a ranch and all of a sudden there's public water running through it, and somebody forgot to tell you that Montana has a stream access law. Or all of a sudden it's hunting season and you've purchased a place that traditionally a lot of people have just, the previous owner let people on by permission or not, to come on to hunt. And all of a sudden you shut it off because you're very interested in game, the wildlife quality. Well, what does that mean over a long period of time? As a neighbor, if you have a very large wildlife population and kind of at the end of hunting season, then they leave your place and go over to the neighbors, what's your responsibility and how do you handle and interact with your neighbors? And I think it's something that's getting better. I think it's people are being able to understand that better. But it's a tough education, I think, for people that to look at land ownership and understand that land ownership isn't static. Because a lot of times people just want to buy a place, you bought it, you rebuilt the fence all the way around it, you build a house in the middle of it, and you want to stay there. But all of a sudden, this landscape, this land that you own, this has maybe you chose to run cows, maybe you leased it to run cows, maybe you decided to run none, and you have wildlife on it, but it isn't static. And I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of recreational buyers to react with. And then my other clients, say that you're a rancher in the valley, and Mike sees this, as Brown, when you look at the Paradise Valley, and you look at, there's basically 3 operating ranches, it's kind of the indigenous ranch operations that are there. He's gone through this transition. There's a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of ranch neighborhoods in the state that haven't, or are just going through it. If you're a long-term rancher and a recreational, somebody comes in and buys the ranch next to you, then what's your responsibility as far as your interaction there? Are you helpful, or do you just stand back and wait to see what happens? And that's generally what, that people stand back and say, and look to see where the wreck's going to come from. And it's an education, I think, on both sides, as, if you will, the Old West tries to adapt to the New West, and the New West trying to have some sensibility to the Old West that was there.
Part of that is getting the public access question. That sort of takes us down that ecological road as well, because private landowners are the stewards of a public resource. And that public resource might come in the form of elk, it might come in the form of mule deer, it might come in the form of clean water and fish. And so there's all kinds of opportunities when we used to know what the ground rules were, because everybody sort of had lived here forever. There's all kinds of opportunities for misunderstanding and for, what's the word I'm looking for? Conflict. About how people all of a sudden say, well, they're my elk and they're eating my alfalfa, and that's a problem. How do you contend with that? I mean, I'd open that up to any of you.
I've been fighting with access and trying to get people around the ranch, trying to show them other public areas, public access. I've done a pretty good study of what the elk, which was what people wanted to go to, was doing. In the 1960s, outfitting wasn't a very viable or important thing going on in Montana, and every ranch had hunters that I still have them today that said, your gates were open when I used to be here. I could go anywhere I want, and now I can't go up there, and that's where the elk are. But back in the 1960s, the District 314, where I'm at, had about 300 head of elk. That was from Gardner, Montana to Livingston, Montana. Now there's somewhere around 3,000 to 9,000, depending on which way they go. So by shutting our gates, I think we've helped a recreational sport by putting more animals in the public areas that they can. Their hunting is a little better. I still have arguments with people that want to be on the ranch hunting what they call the state animal elk. And after talking to them, after working with them, I think they do see in the last 10, 15 years the trend of the elk moving back into the public areas. And if we don't have private areas that we can control them, manage them a little bit more, I think we'd go back down to the 300 head that we had in the 60s.
It's a controversial issue. Number one, we don't own the wildlife. The public owns the wildlife. We do own the land, or we're temporary stewards of the land. We do have the right to control access, but we also are supporting a wildlife resource that has an impact on the land. And then you have very closely held convictions in Montana that the right to hunt allows you to go mostly anywhere. And there's been a free rider status for years where the habitat that was provided by private landowners wasn't really recognized as having much value. We've done calculations on our ranch that demonstrate that the elk in the winter habitat that we provide consume approximately 20% of the forage resource on the ranch. We're not complaining about that. We like the wildlife resource, but we're also unapologetic in the fact that going back to our mission statement, which has economic sustainability as one of its tenets, that we are going to capitalize on our ability to control access for those people willing to pay us for the opportunity to pursue a public animal, a bull elk. At the same time, we try and make a concession to the community because of what I mentioned earlier, trying to fit into the community and satisfy the demand for the majority of the hunters in Montana who just want to put meat in the freezer and have an enjoyable experience with their children. So every year we take 30 to 35 commercial hunters on the ranch. Since our ownership of the ranch in 1989, we've taken 7,400 public hunters on the ranch for free. And we consider that to be a good balance. It does not necessarily resonate with the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission. And as Mike will attest, they have recently taken some action that will make that a little more difficult for us to allow the public on the ranch.
How so?
Well, we used to be able to do it under what's called, I don't know if we want to get into the esoterics of game seasons.
Probably not.
Okay.
Thanks. You're touching a little bit on economic sustainability, and of course that's the ultimate driver. That is the reason we're seeing a demographic shift on ranch lands in Montana and throughout the West, because cows don't pencil on land that costs $10,000 an acre. They just don't. And so Mike, I'm curious about how your family tries to make a go of that, and what lessons you might have learned in the last decade or so.
We're still learning and we're still trying. My younger brother is running the cattle park and a hay operation, and luckily he has a love of life with the cattle, and that's about all he gets. He has a wife that works outside the ranch. When I ran the cattle part of it, I was always into other things, from concrete construction to guiding with other outfitters. I was always looking for outside jobs and things to bring the money into the ranch. And it's been hard. I don't know how to move on without developing and keeping it going, but that's what we're trying. We're always looking for new ways.
So the crux is there's this great public good. We all want to look at that open space. Some of us want to chase those elk. Some of us want to fish those trout. We certainly want the ecosystem benefits that healthy ranch lands provide. And yet it seems like there's a coming train wreck because we can't make a pencil with cows. So Here's a small question to any of you. What's the answer?
Well, let's start with the cheap food policy. No, I think that may be a little too complex.
No, but Russ makes a good point. I mean, for the ranching populations in whether you're integrated wheat, barley, cow operation, or your wheat operation or cow operation, there's a tremendous amount of development that would not have happened in the state of Montana if you had $4 calf prices and $6 wheat. It just changes all the economics. But in kind of my daily life, what I see people, really grappling hard with are, there's a lot of ag operations in the state of Montana that, and definitely cow operations for the last 9 years, are really running debt-free. They don't have any mortgages. Good cattle prices the last 9 years. They're making some money, and now they're 70, somewhere between 75 and 90 years old, and you have generation stacking on ranches. And one of the biggest challenges for people, family dynamics, and moving those ranches that are profitable, moving down, doing succession planning, moving down to the next generation, and taking care, because I don't know how many hours I spend talking to parents about the difference between fair and equal, because fair isn't equal, and there's always, generally speaking, there's always these ranch operations. I don't mean to be cute about this, but there's always one ranch and 3 kids, 2 of them are off the ranch, and they're looking at a ranch today. If you take a line from Hardin to Great Falls, and it's west of that line, just about everything these days is worth $1,000 an acre. So you have ranches that have been long. It might be a 10,000 acre ranch, so it's 10 million. It's a 20,000 acre ranch, you got 20 million. You got Western Montana ranches that are in that 40 to 65,000 acre range that are, technically if you appraised them out of the prices that are out there today, maybe they're worth 40 million or 35 million. So being able to move those kind of assets down to be fair to the person that wants to stay on the ranch and live there, but then also pull equity out of those ranches to take care of and try to and provide the kids that are off the ranch some of the benefits that they look at before estate time, because when estate time comes around and parents haven't been able to do that and have those conversations with their children and do the necessary planning, then the place is sold. And once it's sold, it used to be able to say, okay, well, the person who wants to stay on the ranch, it's worth enough. You're going to do a 1031 exchange in eastern Montana or the western Dakotas, Nebraska, or Kansas. But those days are over because so many of them happened. And not only did they happen from Montana going east, they happen from Minnesota, eastern North to South Dakota, headed west. And those events have collided kind of the Montana, North to South Dakota, and eastern Wyoming line. So those options aren't really there anymore. And that's, I think, for long-term agriculture, that's one of the big, as you guys, the people that you hear and you're looking at doing different kinds of development, there are developers that are going with those families and saying, okay, well, you have to pull some equity out of here. How do you pull out that equity by doing some small, doing a small, maybe a cluster really isn't the right word, type of development to be able to pull cash out. And people, I think, that are looking at that creatively. I think people are looking at the amount of recreational ranches provide that are out there that people want to consume.
Before I open it up, Russ, how do you get to economic stability on the Flying D? Without the fact that your boss is incredibly wealthy.
Not so much as he used to be. Well, it's through, just like we try and promote biodiversity, we're trying to promote financial diversity. And it's through the combination of what I said, bison, livestock grazing, commercial hunting, which is a relatively large component, not nearly so much as bison, and lastly, timber and farming. But obviously, I work for a guy that if bison prices go down, his kids are still going to eat the meal tomorrow night. So I have to recognize that we are not representative of the general ranching community in the state. I'm wondering, something I've seen just recently. is that we have development that's creeping up on our flanks. And the open space, you said something interesting earlier, Rock, that you are developing open space. And Mike, your ranch is one of the few remaining ranches in the valley that hasn't been subdivided. So what we're providing is open space, and really the developers on our boundaries, to some extent, could be considered free riders. Because I've certainly seen it marketed in some of the materials right next to open space Flying Bee Ranch. I don't know if you've seen anything like that in your valley yet, but if there was some way, Rock, that you could go out there and get the developers to pay so that people could extract some equity out of their ranch for the open space ecosystem service that they provide to the development that's happening on their periphery, might be a win-win.
With that, let's open it up. Oh, surely there has to be a question. Come on, with that bomb throwing? It's a way easy group. You really intimidated them, Rock.
Now, Rock and I talked, we do tours, Rock does a lot of tours, he walks into, well, I occasionally walk into a stock growers meeting, and I never have a problem with questions for about an hour. People, in fact, I always encourage them, no softballs, fire that high inside hardball. Any question is fair. There's got to be something out here. Heidi.
This isn't really a question, but maybe it'll help spur some discussion. And I didn't hear the very first part of your presentation. I'm sorry, but I really enjoyed listening to the rest of it. But one of the things that didn't come out when Ted was up there, as a developer who has developed one of these old working ranches, I think one of the services that we provide to the community is that we open up our pastures in Graceland to local ranchers who need that pasture because they have sold off parts of their ranches, or they are depending on BLM leases that are being fought over in courts with you know, environmental groups and that sort of thing. And so we graze sheep, we graze cattle at various times of the year to manage our pastures, but we're also helping out the local ranchers by providing this pasture land that is no longer being used full-time as a working ranch. I guess what I'm trying to say is there can be a lot of different ways you can work with the community, I guess is what I'm going back to kind of some of the community stuff, but also how do we help local ranchers? One way is financially, as you guys were discussing, regarding maybe opening up or somehow the developer paying for that open space adjacent to them, that sort of thing. But also I think just in working with each other, as ranchers always have done through history.
I think there's obviously a certain credibility that's garnered by maintaining some sort of status quo, traditional grazing. I think that you're setting yourself up for antipathy in the community if you buy a ranch, lock it up, and totally change the operation and are dismissive of the fact that maybe some of the ranchers who, no offense intended, probably wish they owned that ranch instead of paying you lease money to graze on it. But if you show that you aren't dismissive of the fact that there is a need and that there's a market, and that if you can help fill that need, it also helps the community perhaps embrace what you're doing. Oh no. You're going to take us up on the tough questions?
You were asking for tough questions, so I wanted to ask a question relating to the issue of access, both in particular stream access, but also hunting and other kinds of recreational access. And I think there is a perception that the traditional Montana ranchers have been relatively open to people could hunt, and there were these sort of traditions of access, and that it's sort of the newcomers, the rich outsiders who then come in and fence things off and try to keep people from accessing the river and keep people off the good hunting land. And I'm wondering if you think that is really true. I mean, is there really an historic tradition of of private landowners in ranch country giving access to people for recreation? Does that tradition exist? And how has it changed with people buying ranches for recreational purposes?
Mike, that's you.
To understand the question, you're asking how the old family ranches are susceptible to access versus the new West people buying in. I think we're pretty much the same. I think I've had 20-some years in the outfitting and listening to people say they used to be there and trying to explain that, you know, if I could get more on my cattle, I wouldn't have to be up here guiding and doing this. And I think the new people that bought in for recreation and shut it down to the public, they put a lot of their time and money somewhere to buy that recreational land. So I think we're all in the same boat as landowners.
Jonathan, let me give you two examples, I think, of what happens here. And one, I'll take my landlord's hat off and put my personal hat on for a minute. You can go to Ringling Ranch Inc. today, and it's a block management area. And so you can wander around through, and we're lucky enough it's all private ground. We have no public land. You can call up the fishing game, you can sign up, you can drive in a park, and you can hunt over 34,000 acres. All you have to do is call up, and we try to limit it to 10 people a day. And we did that because, you know, again, we're lucky enough to have, you know, the ranch produces money. You know, we like to, you know, my dad likes to hunt, I like to hunt. And we feel that being part of the community that we're in, part of being in that greater Miles City eco-Latin community, that's something that we feel personally that we should do. And I contrast that sometimes with, and I understand this very well with a conversation I had earlier this week with a family that just within the last year bought a ranch in western Montana. And they just attended a community meeting about managing a fairly large elk herd that traveled over about 7 big ranches in their area. And the other 6 ranches that were in the area were really looking for them to become involved. And it was a non-starter for them from the standpoint they just couldn't get past the liability issue. In their minds, having the public on their property created a tremendous amount of liability for them, and also it was a safety issue. They felt that they were there all the time. They had young kids, and they didn't come from an area where there was a hunting tradition, or this whole concept of, you know, of people being on the ranch unsupervised with high-powered rifles just sent them over, you know, kind of, they just mentally couldn't make that adaptation. I mean, just couldn't get there. Now, I think after 2 or 3 years of being on that property, looking at that, seeing how it works with the neighbors, they will probably make that transition. But it's one sense to look at land ownership, you know, through from a long-term family perspective, where you're used to people coming onto the property to hunt, and then also coming from a perspective where you just didn't come from that at all. And I think it's very difficult for people to make that transition.
Well, it's also tough because the public perception, as I said earlier, has always been that it's provided for free. The habitat that your family's ranch provides has been provided for free. And that's going to be a long-term evolution of public perception, recognizing who contributes what to the entire wildlife regime. As it relates to stream bed access, and I don't know if I told you this, Jonathan, but when I read the things that you said you were hoping we would address, and I saw stream bed access, I was going to say to you, I'm not going to rise to that fly. The law is the law. As I'm going to take off my Turner hat now. As a citizen of Montana, I appreciate the fact that I can walk up streams and fish. And Ted recognizes the law of Montana. And in fact, we've actually allowed On some places where we probably could prosecute people along the Gallatin River and the Madison River, we've said it just isn't worth it. You know, they may be coming up on the land and outside the high water mark, but that's, again, part of being a member of the community. You don't position a patrolman down there with a sidearm to prosecute everyone that steps 1 foot outside the high water mark. There has to be a balance between private property rights and being a member of the community, underpinned by a respect for the law. And the courts in Montana have spoken. Stream bed access is the law. White light it.
I might also add that the polls have spoken. I mean, that stream access just enjoys this incredible widespread support among all stripes of Montanans. It's one of those things that particularly makes Montana, Montana, I think.
Here's an irony for you. You're talking about access. Flying D Ranch has several roads that go into it. One of them is a public road, county road. There's another road that goes into it that goes through a ranch that has now been purchased for development. And the developer actually admitted to me the other day that the major reason he bought it was because of the open space to his south and his west that he knows is protected in perpetuity. And there's another owner of 20 acres. They have now told me that they don't think we have the right to use a road we've used for 100 years to access our ranch. There's kind of the access issue flipped on its head, that the people enjoying the view shed and the protection of the conservation easement now would also for us like to not go through their property to get to our ranch. It's an irony.
There was somebody who's waited a long time over there, and then I think we need to cede to the next panel.
Rock, you've been involved with the two Montanas, the depopulated Montana in the east, where there are unique challenges to ranches persisting there, and you also have been in the west, where population pressure forces various kinds of changes. I'm just wondering if perhaps you could comment, perhaps Russ could weigh in, given that he has a background prior to working for Ted Turner in looking at high-end ranches. And also for Mike, I have a question for you, but the question for Rock is, what have been the best strategies that you've seen for keeping ranches viable and in business? And along those same lines to you and to Mike, if you're going to have development on your border, what kind of development is most compatible with the kinds of things that you guys are doing as ranchers?
It's been, I think the biggest problem we've grappled with private land conservation, long-term kind of sustainability of ranching operations is basically how do you incentivize, or in blunt terms, how do you put money in the dirt? So families that have decided to stay there to ranch, how do you compensate them monetarily, basically so they don't have to sell to take the highest dollar out. And there's been until recently, there's been very little money in the state of Montana, unlike, say, like Colorado and maybe Virginia, New Mexico, to a certain extent Wyoming. There's been very little money for the purchase of development rights on operating farms and ranches. One of the ideas that we came up with, the president signed on August 17th, was 100% deductibility for working farms and ranches if they donate a conservation easement. So they can deduct, against their AGI, they can deduct 100% and carry it forward for 15 years, which basically means, in a lot of cases, depending how you do it, that ranch won't pay any federal income taxes for a generation. And it isn't a lot of money. A lot of times, maybe if you look at loss carry forward depreciation, you're looking at maybe it's $10,000, maybe it's $20,000, maybe it's $40,000, or in a lot of cases where you have, the highest subsidized part of the Montana agriculture is the spouse that works off the farm or ranch. And so all of a sudden you can shelter all that income coming across, and you can put that to work, either doing, habitat, basically maybe creating better. I argue, because my dad is a closet Audubonner, But it was interesting to me when, 30 years ago, my dad started to manage this ranch for prairie birds. We started to make more money. But basically trying to incentivize and put money into those agricultural operations so they can sustain and make the transition to other activities. I think that's probably the biggest challenge is out there. And I think there's slowly but surely, I mean, there's the bond issues in Missoula County. There's going to be one in Lewis and Martin County. The bond issue in Gallatin County that are being used for purchase development rights. All of those, the FRPP program, the Wetlands Reserve Program, Grassland Reserve Program, all of those. There's a lot of federal programs that are coming up and stuff now, recognizing that there's some of that agricultural production, some of that food production out there for the long term we probably need to keep. And I think it's just been a slow recognition of that happening. I mean, you live in Bozeman. When I was taking plants and soil sciences in Bozeman, there was a place you used to go out and you'd dig a pit. And you look at the soil types in that topsoil in the Gallatin Valley, and that pit was, you dig down in some places, you could dig down almost 30 feet. And I went by there the other day to look at a land project, and all of that's growing houses. And there's a part of me, and I have this agricultural bias, and I understand that, but there's part of me that thinks that someday we're going to rue the day that we build houses on top of Class 5 soils.
I think we're done. We're going to cede to the politicians.
Excuse me, do we have time for Mike to answer the question about what's compatible with working farm and ranches? Should we answer? That's a really great question for us planners.
She's asking you to answer Todd's question about what you see as compatible development on the boundary of your family ranch.
I guess being a cowboy, I like to just see open grazing and cattle there. The development that I was talking about is already done, and I don't shed tears on it. It took some cattle areas that I've known all my life and turned them into houses and roads. And I know it's coming. It's a new west to have developments. I guess as open as you can get is the way I would like to see it.
Thanks for your time, gentlemen. Thank you.